Hi, my name is Purnomo. I'm the pastor of Doonside Anglican Church. When what you see is not what you get, different responses to Jesus. I recently began listening to an audiobook, The Triumph of the Seed, how grains, nuts, kernels, pulses, and pips conquered the plant kingdom and shaped human history. It's written by Thor Hansen. It's not a Christian book, but still quite a fascinating book about seed, one of the least impressive-looking objects. We easily take seeds for granted, but actually we live in a world of seeds. From our morning coffee and bread, to the cotton in our clothes and the cup of hot chocolate we might drink before bed, seeds are everywhere. They give us food and fuels, intoxicants and poisons, oils, dyes, fibers, and spices. Without seeds, there will be no bread, no rice, no beans, corn, or nuts. It's interesting that in the first parable of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel, he uses seeds to talk about heaven, about the kingdom of heaven. In particular, Jesus uses seeds to show that often what you see is not what you get. And that in turn explains why people respond differently to Jesus. The Bible tells us that ultimately, everyone must respond to Jesus, whether they like it or not. Jesus himself claims that our eternal future depends on how we respond to him. As we will see, responding to Jesus is not a one-off thing. It's something that we do through the rest of our lives. So it's important to understand what Jesus has to say about different responses to him. Matthew 13 begins with Jesus sitting by the lake and large crowds gathered around him, that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. And Jesus begins telling the parable in verse 3. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. The disciples then came to Jesus and asked him, verse 10, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" Jesus tells them why he is talking that way. I spoke about Jesus' answer in my previous video on the series on Matthew's Gospel. Jesus told his disciples that they have been given what others haven't, namely the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. I hope that video helps you understand what it means to be Jesus' disciples, that the secrets of heaven are not what we might expect, and what difference it makes to know the secrets of heaven. In short, the secrets of heaven is that heaven is a gift from God through faith in Jesus Christ. If you haven't watched my previous video, I highly recommend that you first do so. In this video, I will assume that you have watched it. So according to Jesus, the knowledge of the secrets of heaven has been given to his disciples, but not to others. God's secret thoughts and plans were hidden from human reason. They would remain hidden for those whose hearts are ignorant and unresponsive to the message Jesus proclaimed. Jesus says that that's why he speaks in parables to the crowds. The parables are like double-edged sword. They hide God's kingdom from those who choose to remain ignorant, but they reveal God's kingdom to Jesus' disciples. Now, how is all this teaching about the secrets of heaven related to the parable of the sower? What does the parable even mean? So let's listen to Jesus' explanation to his disciples of what the parable means. Jesus says in verse 18, "Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path." In Jesus' explanation here, it becomes clear that Jesus uses seeds in this parable as a metaphor for the message about the kingdom of heaven, which has been the focus of Jesus' teaching in Matthew from the beginning. The seed is sown on different kinds of grounds, which stand for different conditions of the heart and different responses to Jesus. The first one is the hard soil along the path. The seed doesn't actually go into the ground, and the birds came and ate it up, we are told, before the seed is able to germinate at all. So Jesus explains that this is like people who hear his word, but the word doesn't produce anything in them. Their heart is hard, so they reject Jesus' message out of hand, and therefore Satan comes and just takes it away. Jesus is not talking about demon possession here. Remember, Jesus has given insight into Satan's influence before in Matthew's Gospel. Often what you see is not what you get. Satan's work can be much more subtle than we expect. Maybe he replaces the word of Jesus with other thoughts. Or maybe he questions and denies the goodness of God in the process. So on the one hand, Satan is to blame. But on the other hand, the reason Satan can snatch away the word is because of the hard heart. The word never goes below the surface. Jesus addresses this hard-heartedness in the same chapter. He says, whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. I explained that in my previous video. We've seen many examples of this kind of response in the Gospel of Matthew so far, particularly among the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. They were disappointed by Jesus because Jesus doesn't dance to their tune, doesn't behave the way they want him to behave. But the Pharisees are not alone in this category. As we have seen in other parts of Matthew so far, many others fit in as well, even those people of Jesus' own hometown. The hard-hearted ignores Jesus' words in the Beatitudes of his Sermon on the Mount. They are not poor in spirit, nor meek. They won't mourn over their sins. This group of people hardens their heart and rejects the secrets of heaven. So that's the first soil. Human hard-heartedness and Satan. The second soil is the rocky places or rocky ground. It's the shallow soil. What happens is the seed falls into the thin layer of topsoil, and because it is so thin, in the spring it heats up the fastest, and so the seed germinates the quickest. It seems to be the most promising. Up come the little shoots. Everybody would say, this is going to be a good part of the field. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Jesus explains that this is like people who hear his word and at once receives it with joy. That is, they promise to be the most enthusiastic of the crop, on fire for Jesus. But again, what you see is not what you get. Later, Jesus says, when a bit of suffering comes because of Jesus, things get tough. A bit of persecution, a bit of opposition because of Jesus. They just withered and die. The problem is that the heart is shallow. Please notice how this second group of people responds to Jesus. When they hear the gospel, they receive Jesus with joy. But when they are persecuted because of their faith in Jesus, they fall away. But those to whom the secrets of heaven have been given, even when they come under persecution, they rejoice. Remember how Jesus describes them in his Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. The problem is that the heart is shallow. This soil shows how it is possible to have some element of Christian life, some element of Christian teaching, some element of Christian belief, to be associated with the people of God, but still not to have that kind of root in you which perseveres, which presses on. We sometimes have superficial understanding of conversion. People can make a profession of faith and we think, well, he signed a prayer card, once saved, always saved, he's in. But Jesus warns us, beware of shallow hearts. I read a story about Martin Lloyd-Jones, a famous English preacher of the 20th century. One day after he preached a powerful sermon, an unbeliever came up to him and said, "Sir, I must tell you that if you would have given an altar call at the end of your message, I certainly would have come forward and I would have believed in Jesus." Lloyd-Jones replied, "If you don't want Jesus 5 minutes after the service is over, then I assure you that you didn't truly want him at any point during my sermon." Now, perhaps that is stronger than you would put it, but the point is a good one. So that's the second soil, the shallow heart. Now, before I go on, can I please remind you that if you find this video helpful, please click on the like and subscribe button and share it with other people so that they can also benefit from it. The third soil is the one with thorns, which represent their worldly attachments and temptations. Jesus says, this is like people who hear his word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. In other words, these people care too little about their soul because they care too much about the world. For them, the seed never grows, but the thorns certainly do. Remember that Jesus has warned us before about worries in Matthew's Gospel. He mentioned even basic needs such as food, drink, and clothing. So I do not think that Jesus is condemning all wealth here. In other words, this parable here applies not just to the haves, but also to the have-nots. The problem here is an anxious and tempted heart. Those to whom the secrets of heaven have been given, they obey Jesus' words in his Sermon on the Mount. Store up treasures in heaven, not on earth. Do not worry like pagans. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all your basic needs will be given to you as well. But this third group of people finds that the concerns and temptations of the here and now choke Jesus' word. Thus, they also miss out on the secrets of heaven. That's the third soil, an anxious and tempted heart. By contrast with the previous three kinds of soil, the fourth and final kind of soil is the good soil, where the seed produces an abundant harvest. Jesus was living around Israel, an arid part of the world, where a harvest is considered bountiful if it is 7 or 8 times the amount of seed sown. But Jesus is talking about 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. For that part of the world, such harvest is simply unthinkable, humanly speaking. Thus, Jesus is ending the parable on a very positive note. Jesus explains that this good soil is like people who hear his word and understand it. In other words, as I explained in my previous studio, they are the disciples of Jesus, those who have been given the secrets of heaven. I believe when Jesus refers to an abundant harvest in the parable of the sower, he is not talking about good works, or even what the Apostle Paul calls the fruit of the Spirit. No, in the context of Matthew 13, an abundant harvest refers to the knowledge of the secrets of heaven, which, as I explained in my previous video, might not be what most people expect. In short, the secrets of heaven is that we can enter heaven through faith in Jesus Christ, by God's grace. Please note that Jesus mentions the secrets of heaven before he explains the parable of the sower to the disciples. He says in verse 12, "Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance." In verse 16, Jesus says, "Blessed are your eyes, because they see, and your ears, because they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it." It's after Jesus says these words that he explains the parable to the disciples. That's why I believe the abundant crop in the parable of the sower is the knowledge of salvation through Jesus Christ. As I said in my previous video, Jesus' disciples are those whom Jesus considers blessed in his terms, as laid out in his Sermon on the Mount. This group of people hears Jesus' word and understands it. It is not that they won't face the challenges that the other three soils face. Elsewhere, the Bible tells us that they will. But they will overcome those challenges. They will persevere. So it doesn't mean Satan will not try to attack the faith of Jesus' disciples. Elsewhere, the Bible tells them to stand firm against Satan's schemes. But because they have the right attitude towards Jesus, very different from the first soil, Satan cannot snatch away the secrets of heaven that Jesus has given them. And it's not that Jesus' disciples don't face any persecution or suffering. Elsewhere, Jesus clearly warns his disciples that they will suffer for his sake. But compared to the second soil, the shallow heart, Jesus' disciples would respond differently. When facing suffering and persecution because of Jesus, the shallow heart will fall away, whereas Jesus' disciples will consider themselves blessed. It's not that Jesus' disciples never have any worries of life or never face temptations. No, but they don't let those concerns choke their faith in Jesus, like the third soil. When weary and burdened, Jesus' disciples would come to Jesus for mercy, submit to him, learn from him, and find rest in him. It's worth taking a pause here and asking ourselves, what kind of soil are we in this parable? Are you Jesus' disciples? If you are, then know that you are blessed because you have been given the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. And therefore, you hear Jesus' word and understand it. And your knowledge of salvation through Jesus Christ would grow deeper and stronger and produce an abundant harvest that will help you to persevere to the end. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord in the name of Christ. Amen.